Welcome, writers, readers, and friends to the Authors Talking Bookish podcast. I'm Donna Norman Carbone, author of All That Is Sacred.
And I'm Hope Gibbs, author of Where the Grass Grows Blue.
We're two debut writers traditionally published by a small publishing house, bringing to you all the experiences that we as authors learn the hard way, so you don't have to.
We'll give you insights from the inception of a book idea to publication and beyond. And along the way, we'll share our love of books from the writer's perspective.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 29. Today, we're going to be talking about how to read like a writer. I'm Donna Carbone, and I'm joined by Hope Gibbs. Hi, Hope. How are you?
I'm good, Donna. How are you?
I'm great, despite the rainy weather today.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's actually really pretty here in Tennessee.
Is it?
Sorry. It's
hot.
hot.
I envy you.
Well, I mean, it's also going to be 97 degrees. So do you really envy me?
I heard we're supposed to get some fall temperatures up here.
Oh, wow. That's nice.
Yeah.
Just in time for school.
I know. I'm entering my last week of vacation. So next week starts school. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's already started here. It started in my area like August the 5th. So we start back really early.
That is very early. I start with a few PD days, and then the kids come in the last Thursday of August. So I always can't wait to meet my kids.
Yeah, that's always exciting. I mean, it's back to school time's a little different for me. I'm actually going to make a road trip next weekend to Knoxville and to Athens to see two of my kiddos. And I'm taking along their favorite meals. And I'm just going to do like a little drive by, say hello, and head back.
Oh, that's awesome. I love that. I love that.
So let's talk about today, because this was your idea. And I was a little intimidated by this. What you came up with. So why don't you tell us about episode 29, how to read like a writer?
Yeah. I teach a course called, it's an AP course, Language and Composition. And we talk about rhetoric in it. And really the foundation of the whole course is learning to read like a writer, taking a look at what the writer is doing versus what the writer is saying. And, we call them moves in my class. Like, what moves is the writer making? And it just occurred to me, like, that's something that I do without thinking about it, but not everybody does. I mean, we're taught to be passive readers, take in, the plot, the characterization, the setting, everything that the author tells you. But what I wanted to really get to is a more active kind of reading where you're paying attention to what they're doing, how they're doing it, and why they're doing it. Like, what is the result of that when the reader gets their hands on it?
Yeah. And I will say, again, I've said it many times on our podcast. I didn't set out to be a writer. I just kind of stumbled into it. And I was just that. I was a very passive reader. And, when I was not writing. But now after I've written, a book, almost 2 books and going on book 3, I read books differently now. I sometimes read it, obviously for enjoyment and entertainment. But I also read it as, someone trying to learn, the writers that I am a fan of. And I also are thinking of the things like point of view. I used to not read a book and think, oh, well, this has been written in first person or third person limited. I didn't do that. And now is obviously the first thing that I notice. So I am excited. And you said that let's pick out 3 or 4 of books that speak to a different way to be an active reader, or, to try to learn from what the author is trying to give you, except not just entertainment.
Yeah, absolutely. So I chose some books. I'm going to start with All the Light We Cannot See, which is one of my absolute favorite novels. It's written by Anthony Doerr, and I think he is just a wordsmith. He writes beautiful prose. We talk about in my class, and I also pay attention to as a writer, the writing style. The way that authors use words and sentences and other kinds of devices like metaphors and similes and what have you. just to create the beautiful words on the page. So I wanted to share a little snippet from this book, and I'm going to read from the beginning, so no spoilers, and it's just going to be a quick read. Anthony Doerr, actually, one of his characteristics as a writer is that he writes very short, concise chapters. And so I'm going to read today from 3 different chapters, but you're going to see how short they are and how much he packs into them. And then I'll talk a little bit about just some of the things that I notice as a writer. So here goes. The first one is called Leaflets. At dusk, they pour from the sky. They blow across the ramparts, turn cartwheels over rooftops, flutter into the ravines between houses. Entire streets swirl with them, flashing white against the cobbles. Urgent message to the inhabitants of this town, they say. Depart immediately to open country. The tide climbs, the mood hangs small and yellow and gibbous. On the rooftops of beachfront hotels to the east and in the gardens behind them, a half dozen American artillery units drop incendiary rounds into the mouths of mortars. And that's the first one. The second one is called Bombers. They cross the channel at midnight. There are 12, and they are named for songs: Stardust and Stormy Weather, and In the Mood, and Pistol Packin' Mama. The sea glides along far below, spattered with the countless chevrons of white caps. Soon enough, the navigators can discern the low moonlit lumps of islands ranged along the horizon. France. Intercoms crackle deliberately, almost lazily. The bombers shed altitude. Threads of red light ascend from the anti-air emplacements up and down the coast. Dark, ruined ships appear, scuttled or destroyed, one with its bow shorn away, a second flickering as it burns. On an outermost island, panicked sheep run zigzagging between rocks. Inside each airplane, the bombardier peers through the aiming window and counts to 20, 4, 5, 6, 7. To the bombardiers, the walled city on its granite headland, drawing ever closer, looks like an unholy tooth, something black and dangerous, a final abscess to be lanced away. The next one is called The Girl, and I'm only going to read the first paragraph of this. In a corner of the city, inside a tall, narrow house at number 4 Rue Valborel, on the 6th and highest floor, a sightless 16-year-old named Marie Laurie LeBlanc kneels over a low table covered entirely with a model. The model is a miniature of the city she kneels within and contains scale replicas of the hundreds of houses and shops and hotels within its walls. There's the cathedral with its perforated spire and the bulky old Chateau de Saint Malo, and row after row of seaside mansions studded with chimneys. A slender wooden jetty arcs out from the beach called the Plague du Mole. A delicate reticulated atrium vaults over the seafood market. Minute benches, the smallest no larger than apple seeds, dot the tiny public squares. So that's just one paragraph in this next chapter, which is definitely longer than the first 2 that I read. But what I wanted to point out about this book is just the way that he uses his words. He uses a pretty sophisticated vocabulary. He also uses different lengths of sentences. So, I mean, there's one sentence in there that's one word. And he really paints a picture with a lot of imagery in your mind about this. And he kind of starts from a distance and kind of takes us in, sort of telescopes us in to this life of Marie, who is the main character of the novel. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I have not read that book. I also know it was actually made into, I think, a Netflix.
Yeah, and it was really good. Yeah, it was very good. Mark Ruffalo starred in it, and then there was a no-name previously. Also, the main character is blind, and the woman who played her is blind as well.
Oh,
And she did such a remarkable job. She was amazing.
well, that is a wonderful example of, trying to be an active reader as well, what you can learn from him. Of course, I've talked on this podcast about my love of one author. I think that I've said her name probably as many times as I've actually said my own book, and it is none other than Ellen Hildebrand. And the reason I selected this book in particular, Ellen is all about Nantucket. If you have read almost every single book, with the exception, there is one series that she writes that takes place in the Caribbean. They all take place on Nantucket. And the reason I chose this book is because of the way she establishes atmosphere and setting. And when you read this, you don't just see Nantucket, you feel it. You feel it in the salty air, the warmth of the sun, the chill of the Atlantic breeze. And she really puts you in the moment. She has layers and history of Nantucket. And the reason I chose the Hotel Nantucket specifically is that in this book, in the back, she included this little blue book. And it's almost like your own tour guide, your own roadmap if you want to visit Nantucket. But she also includes it within this book. She talks about this blue book that they give all their hotel guests. And I was so inspired by the way that she writes about Nantucket that last fall, I went with two of my dear girlfriends, it's 2 falls ago. And we went to Nantucket and we stayed in this exact hotel. The hotel is actually called the Nantucket Hotel. We stayed in the suite that she talks about. We even swore there might have been a ghost like she talks about in the book, but we went to every restaurant. We went to all the places that she suggests. And it really, as a reader, as a fan, it made me want to be able to put those kind of details in my own book. And so where the grass grows blue, it takes place in a small town in Kentucky. I learned from Ellen how important setting is. It's almost like an entire character of your book.
Yeah. I love that you took a pilgrimage there. That is amazing.
Yeah. I even blogged about it. I have it on my website, and it's called A Southern Woman's Guide to Nantucket, because being Southerners, we don't understand ferries. We didn't understand what kind of a plane we were going to be on. We didn't understand cobblestone streets and that hills you do not wear heels when you are in Nantucket. Trust me.
Flip-flops all the way.
Yeah.
That's
so
awesome.
What's the next book that you selected to talk about?
So the next book I selected, this is heavy. It's a big book. It's called Demon Copperhead, and it's by Barbara Kingsolver. The reason I chose this book is because I long ago became a Barbara Kingsolver fan when I read the Poisonwood Bible. It's honestly one of my favorite books that I've ever read. Definitely like in my top 10. I bought Demon Copperhead and decided to read this because I teach David Copperfield to my British literature students. And I attended a book talk with Barbara Kingsolver. And that was really exciting. And she was talking about going to one of the homes that Charles Dickens lived in at Gad's Hill, that is now like a bed and breakfast, and writing and becoming inspired just by being sort of in his essence. And so I absolutely loved that. But the reason I picked it out for us today is because I think she's such an architect of plot. And I think there probably isn't a better example of that than this book. The way that she mirrors what Charles Dickens did in a modern retelling of the story of David Copperfield just blew me away, down to the minute details. And so I would imagine that she is very much a planner when she's writing her novel, because her story just weaves together so seamlessly. And so I really do deem her as an architect of literature.
I love that. I actually bought that book. I have not gotten to it because, I also read a lot of books for Bookish Road Trip.
Yeah.
So I'm always constantly with a book in hand, but that I actually have that in the cabinet right behind me, and it is on my to-do. And it won a pretty big award, did it
I
not?
think, didn't it win a Pulitzer?
I think it did.
Yeah,
I think
I'm pretty sure it did. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a Oprah's book club recommendation too.
Well, so speaking of Bookish Road Trip, as I told
Yeah.
you, I read lots of books for that. And I stumbled across this book before I was a tour guide at Bookish Road Trip. And I loved it so much that I reached out to this author when I took over Author Take the Wheel to see if we would be lucky enough to get her. And she not only said yes, she was probably one of my all-time favorite authors to interview. She is the most positive, happy person I have ever met. And this is by Jean Meltzer. It is called The Matzo Ball. And so the matzo ball really, and we just had a typo, I just realized that. The matzo ball, the reason I chose it is it's this delightful book about this world famous Christmas author. And she sets the beginning. The first chapter captures you. And she loves everything about Christmas. Her apartment, she has a secret room in her apartment where she writes all these Christmas novels. And no one knows who she is, though, because she writes it anonymously because her parents are Jewish. Her father is a rabbi, and her parents have no idea what she does for a living. And the reason I love it is obviously her publisher, I'm not giving away anything, wants her to ditch the Christmas books and write a Jewish book about Hanukkah. And she is totally thrown by it because she was like, what's romantic about Hanukkah? And she comes up with this clever idea of the matzah ball, as in it's a ball to celebrate Hanukkah. And I love it because I didn't know a lot about, I know the high holidays. I know a little bit about, what it's like to be, someone who's Jewish, but she teaches you in an entertaining way. She was giving all of these wonderful, holidays and their traditions, things I did not know. And I loved it so much that, of course, I buy another one of her books. And she is just the most delightful writer and author. And she also talks about her main character has a chronic illness, and you don't always get that with the protagonist. And she just weaves that together, and she just gives you culture, and she also gives you a different POV.
That's awesome. I have a lot of Jewish friends, and I love Jewish food. You could write a whole book just about Jewish food.
Yeah. And she talks about that and foods that I'm not really familiar with here in, the South. And she really opened up my perspective. And again, she is one of my all-time favorite authors. And I love her.
Yeah, I saw that episode and she was great. She did a fantastic job with that whole week takeover.
Yeah, do yourself a favor and check out. I think she now has 4 books out. Do yourself a favor and check her out.
Yeah, awesome. All right. Well, the next book that I'm going to talk about, author really, not necessarily just the book, but Liane Moriarty, her novel Apples Never Fall was also just adapted into a limited series, which I saw, and it was amazing. But Liane Moriarty is someone that I admire as kind of a mentor. I read her books not only for entertainment, but also to learn from them because she always has an ensemble cast. And that's something that I'm interested in as a writer. My first book had 5 characters. My next book had 3 primary characters, but there was a host of other characters as well. She does such a great job really getting into the heads of her characters and making each one of them distinct. I would imagine she does like a whole dossier on each of her characters when she's writing them. And this book in particular, each chapter is from a different perspective, but it's not the way that authors normally do it, where they kind of put the author's or the narrator's name at the top, so you know that you're sort of shifting gears. But she puts the the characters' names like in the first sentence. So you know who, like what chapter is about what character. And then she also does some where she kind of like moves out and does some omniscient work. So there's an omniscient narrator who's far away, and then she kind of zooms in and takes us in the world of each of the characters that she writes. And I think she just does an amazing job at that. I have read several of her books, and I haven't read a Liane Moriarty book I haven't liked.
Yeah. I loved, is it Big Little Lies? I think that she, I know she wrote that. I love that book.
Yeah.
Okay. So speaking of narrator, I think I have also said this on this podcast. The Age of Innocence is one of my absolute favorite books. It is told from a third person omniscient narrator. And this is the voice that knows pretty much everything about these characters. But mainly it does focus on the main character of Newland Archer. He is the protagonist, and he is torn between his duty to society and this unconventional Countess Ellen Olenska. I love this book so much, and I would normally try to read, but it's something that I think that you should read it yourself, because you really get into that world. You can see, the parties. And I love how, she does slip out of POV a few times, because she will tell you, what other people are thinking. And I just, she tells a story. And of course, it's an older book. I think it was written in 1920. And I think it won the Pulitzer in 1921. She's the first woman to have won the Pulitzer. And so I love it. Do yourself a favor and read the book. I read it once a year. And I have the movie. My husband is, when he walks in, he's like, "You're watching that again?" I'm like, "Yes." And also I just love the love story and Archer having to, I'm not going to give it away, but he is very much torn between what his family demands of him, what New York society in the late 1800s, expects of him. And, he's very much torn with wanting to be a free man. So,
yeah, I think I think there's something to be said about reading a book over and over and over again, because I do think that you see different things, you pick up on things. And I also think that you kind of meet a book where you are in life. So you notice different things.
I like that. You do. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we have time, because we're running, we could do this all day, but we are running short. So I'm going to have you do your final book.
I'll do this real quick. The reason I chose Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid is because, everything we're talking about today is style. And if you haven't read this book, she does it in a very journalistic way. And it's as if you're reading an interview with all of these characters. And I just thought that was a really interesting choice. At first, when I started reading it, I wasn't sure if I was going to like it, but I totally fell in love with it. Yeah. So I just wanted to mention that like the style that you write it in says just as much as the story.
Now, I have not read that book, but I did read Carrie Soto is Back. It's the one about the tennis player. And she does that kind of in some of the chapters in that book. It's like she's doing like an ESPN interview or a newspaper article, and then it starts into the chapter. So cool. Yeah, so it kind of gives you a little bit of, it's telling, but it's also, it's necessary. And I really enjoyed that book. So I need to read that one.
Yeah, it was good. I highly recommend.
So as we are closing out, Donna, why don't you, got to get back into that teacher mode. What is our do now?
So I think if you're a writer starting out and you're not really sure what your own style is, I would make a list of authors that you really enjoy reading. I do an exercise with my creative writing students that I want to share with you today, and it's called mirror writing. And mirror writing is simply that you take a piece of your own writing, whatever the subject matter, and try to write it in the style of one of the authors that you admire. So, for instance, if I were to take my book, All That Is Sacred, and write it in the style of Taylor Jenkins Reid's, I would write it as an interview of each of the characters. And I think that's a great exercise to kind of stretch your writing skills and challenge yourself and see what feels right. And maybe something that feels right, you incorporate into your own writing repertoire.
Actually, I need to do that.
It's fun. It's a fun exercise.
Yeah, that is.
Yeah.
So, as always, you guys can find us on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, Google, and YouTube. And check out our website at authorstalkingbookish.com. And real quick before we leave, what is our next episode, Donna?
So our next episode is, what kind of writer do you want to be? Setting goals, priorities, and boundaries.
Yes, boundaries. That's something that I really think that we should really discuss, because with social media, it's hard to set those boundaries. And it's something that you don't think about when you're writing a book. It's really when that book is sold and it's getting ready to come out. So as always, it was so good to spend some time with you all, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us today. I'm Hope Gibbs.
And I'm Donna Norman Carbone. It's time for you to get to work.
We look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks with another tip from your author friends.